Ladies and gentlefolk, welcome to the show. I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios, and today was supposed to be the release of the series versus parallel video. Now that's been put back a couple of days because there's some tweaks I need to make to it, but today this news dropped. So this is the first thing I want to talk about. Today I'm going to do some coverage of what I thought was important from NAMM, and this seems to have only dropped today, and Axe FX 3. Axe FX 3 is something that Cliff from Fractal said was not going to happen for a long time, but that was 3 or 4 years ago now. So for a long time, it's been a long time. So as you can see, it's huge. These things, it looks at least one rack unit bigger than the previous Axe FX. So there's more physical Axe FX. It's bigger. It's an absolute beast. So let's talk through this before we move on to any of the other NAMM stuff. So there's a complete remake. It's more than twice as powerful as the previous Axe FX, which means you can have more effects, more routing. There's a lot of clever stuff going on. Apparently it's got 2 more powerful DSP processors, but also it's got a dedicated processor just for the USB out and a dedicated processor for the graphics stuff. So they are not, because it's got a color screen now and it's got all sorts of fancy stuff going on, but because that's handled by a separate processor, that does not affect the sound, which can only be a good thing. And somewhere, where did I read? Yeah, a proprietary FPGA. What an FPGA means, that's a big deal, because an FPGA is a kind of chip that can be completely reprogrammed via software. And I mean on the hardware level. An FPGA, you send it an update and it completely changes how that chip works. They're quite expensive, FPGAs. So, but they are a thing. RME use FPGAs in all of their interfaces, which means when they do an update, they can completely add new features at the hardware level, which is something that you don't see from lower tier developers because they're expensive. This is just a pretty graph, but so there's a color display. They're really listening to guitarists. I mean, there's 4 sets of inputs and 4 sets of outputs, which if you use a 4-cable method system, but you also want to reamp, that's all there. Input 1 is mono because that's the jack on the front. But from what they've said, you can have this set in any way you like. The USB is 8 channel in, 8 channel out. Apparently it's better quality converters than a lot of high-end audio. So I'm really interested by a lot of this stuff. The I/O on the back is massive as well. Outputs 1 and 2 both have XLRs, and output 1 also has jack outputs. There's the Fastlink 2, which is the new pedal board protocol, which we'll talk about as well, because that phantom powers a pedal board that comes out to the front of house, which means that you don't have to send power to the front to your pedal board. You just run one standard XLR cable, not even depressingly expensive, I'm sure. But how much does a new tube amp cost? I mean, this is not made for kids. This is not made for bedroom guitarists. This is a serious tool made for serious musicians. We're probably going to see these on stage with guys who are traditional tube amp users finally, throwing the towel in and going, fine, I'll use it. I mean, something a lot of people forget with Axe FX is, yes, they're an amazing amp and cab modeler, but also the actual effects on them. The reverbs, the choruses, the delays, completely blow out of the water a lot of the old gear. So if you are a tube amp user, but you use things like, the old TC Electronics 2290 delay unit, which is a 2 or 3 unit delay rack, and you use choruses, flangers, how about getting just one of these and routing? So you plug your guitar into this, it goes into the input of the amp, then back to the Axe effects, then back to the amp again. So you can put things like boosts and wahs and delays and reverbs and all that kind of stuff in with the real tube amp if that's your thing. And record all of it via the USB socket. The routing looks a lot more potentially complicated now if you want it to be. There's more physical analog inputs and outputs. So yeah, if you've got output 1 and output 2 doing different things, so if you've got, you can actually do like a dry, wet, dry kind of thing with this. You can have output 1 being the dry amp and output 2 being a stereo wet. But then on the USB, you also get the DI for if you want to reamp it later on. And there's input 2 as well if you want to record an extra input into it. I mean, why not? You could use this. It doesn't have microphone preamps in it, but I can see myself getting external microphone preamps and running them into input 2 on the back of here. So then I've got some world-class converters on what then becomes a big audio interface, if the conversion is as good as they claim. So yeah, lots of nice pictures of all the supported DAWs. Audio file quality signal path. I mean, they've not given us any specs, but this is fractal. And yeah. Yeah, so it's got Burr Brown and analog devices op amps, bipolar power supply, Cirrus Logic converters. So basically they've picked the best of the best for everything, which is not going to be cheap, but the Axe FX series was never about cheap. So there's something like 2,000 cabs in there now. All the amps have apparently been redone. So picking up where Quantum left off, latest amp modelling, so in firmware 1, it's going to be better than the Quantum apparently. And the Quantum is so much better than when the Axe FX started that I reckon as they find newer ways to improve, they'll keep putting them in. So you can blend, if you've ever used impulse responses, you'll know a lot of people want a bit of one microphone and a bit of one microphone and a bit of a different cabinet. So you can blend them all live with a 4-channel mixer. You can apparently remix the impulse responses on the fly, which is a big deal because that means that if you want 2 mics on one cab, 1 mic further back on another cab, and maybe, you know, a microphone inside the back of the cabinet, you can blend them all in the Axe FX, where you used to have to go and do things like get the Cab Lab software and do it separately. Now you can do it in the interval in between sets. What's so different to the modelling to the likes of IK and Overloud? Oh, they are hugely different. The amount of processing power that these guys put into an amp model, if you were to do that on an x86 processor, that is to say a PC, that would max out the most recent processors, because that's one thing that the DSP chips that they use are dedicated to audio. So they can go into the nth detail where you can't go that far in detail with x86 based stuff, because the processor couldn't handle more than 2 or 3 of the amps before completely clogging up and not allowing you to do a mix, in which case that'd get thrown in the bin, because then you go, oh, it sounds great, but I can't mix with it. Which is what a lot of PC based amp models are for, really. So they've got all these effects, which some of them have been massively updated. Dedicated Plex blocks with 8 delay lines and a feedback arrangement for shimmer effects. A new pitch block with improved pitch detection. Routing grid has been expanded to 6 rows and 14 columns, so you can go absolutely crazy with it. The effect screens are in colour. Ooh, doesn't really bother me, but it is nicer to look at than the black on green. Apparently they've put a lot of money and effort into making sure that this new screen is readable even in like blinding sunlight, which is cool. There's channels and scenes, which is a thing. Ah, right. So with channels, apparently what you'll be able to do is have like what you consider to be one super amp with 4 channels, which the channels can come from different amps. So if you're in your head, you go clean, crunch, real crunch, lead, you can have completely different amp models for those channels, which would work for me, because then I could have like Fender Twin for my clean, a Plexi for my crunch, JCM 800 for my really rocky crunch, and something like a Mesa Mark IV or a dual rectifier, depending on the song, for my lead, and all without changing the rest of that patch. So if in your mind you prefer working with a pedal board, you could in your mind have, you know, Tube Screamer, a delay unit that you like, a reverb that you like, a flanger or whatever it is that you like, and have them running all the time and change the amp channel without completely mucking the whole thing up. Hey, works for me because it's less button presses and it just works. So there's always the axe edit. There's new foot controllers. So there's a small one and a big one. Something that I noticed, each button has different colours around it. So if you have, you know, red for drive, blue for delay, or whatever it is that you want to do, that's all on there. And something that where did I read? Foot switch features. It might have been, yeah, there we go, clone mode. If you're a big, yes, it looks like it's got scribble strips on every channel and a big one at the top. So you can see what patch you're on in big letters, and in smaller letters there's scribble strips on each one. Clone mode really interests me because that means that you can have 2 foot switches connected to the same axe effects. So either you can have one one on stage for you, the guitarist, and you could have one off stage for your tech. So if you go wandering, they could change the patches for you while you're running around, goofing off or doing whatever it is. Or you could have one on each side of a big stage, so you could run over and, you know, not have to run back to your post, as it were. You could have 2 places. So, I mean, for a smaller stage user, that doesn't mean anything, but for some of these guys who are running big shows, and the fact that these are phantom powered, which means that the microphone cable that you use, standard mic cable, which means it's easily replaceable if you break it, would be able to run to wherever. Centre of the universe, Wigan. Hi, Sydney. Looks like we've got a lot of viewers today. This is going to be a popular video. So that's the end, and there's join the wait list, which means it's not available yet. They've not given a date, they've not given a price, but a lot of people will be already saving their money and holding on tight. And I'm considering, when this comes out, either getting someone else's Axe Effects 2 for cheap, or if I get enough money in the studio that I can justify it, then getting one of these, because they look so good, but they're gonna be so expensive, and I'm gonna have to really, yeah, there's nothing on the G66 site for Europe yet. That I found that as well, because I was trying to find prices and things. This only came out today. This is one of the reasons why this is the headline of this video, because this US is listed as shipping from March. Sell all my amps and get one. I don't think if I sold all my amps that would be worth one Axe Effects. That's the thing, unless you've got something like a Mesa Mark V, which I don't. A lot of tube amps are not worth what people think they're worth, because your amps are only worth what people will pay for them, and the more and more Axe Effects and that kind of stuff comes out, the less and less those tube amps are worth. Oh, you can email G66 directly and they'll put you on the waiting list. If anyone else has got any questions about the Axe FX3, I've pretty much told you most of what I know, but it was really worth talking about. So, sell along, yes. Yeah, tell me about it. Moving on then, because I've got quite a few things I want to talk about with I don't even know if this is NAMM news. Oh, on a related note, there was an interview with the professor from Kemper earlier this week with Lee Anderton, Captain Anderton, and he asked, no one knew about the Fractal announcement, although I'll bet a few people knew. He asked him, is there going to be a new Kemper? And he very explicitly said there is going to be no new Kemper hardware, which should really have set alarm bells ringing that the Axe FX3 was coming, but it seems that they're sticking to their guns right now, Kemper. So, yeah, let's skip one story and move ahead to something that's kind of related but not. Yeah, the Kemper news was that there was no news, but that's interesting in itself if they're confident enough in their hardware. I mean, the Kemper's a very different beast, and one of the reasons I've never thought about getting a Kemper is that it profiles amps. I don't want profiles of amps. I want an ideal version of an amp. But I know that's just me. So, meh. Yeah, if it works for you and it sounds great, then go for it. So, on the modelling side, the Line 6 Helix HX. So, the Helix HX was announced. This is not an amp modeler. This is just the effects. So this is things like your drive pedals, your like wah, delays, reverbs, and it's about half the price of the Helix. So yeah, if you are a tube amp user, if you really love the way that tubes respond and the way the speaker cabinet works, that's your thing. And in the studio, I do. In the studio, that's my thing. But if you don't want to buy a million drive pedals, if you don't want to buy rack delay units and rack reverb units, then this may be the answer for you, because I think that Line 6's Helix effects are really good. Everything that I've heard from them has been really impressive, but the amps have been okay and the cabs have left something to be desired. Although the fact that they built in an impulse response loader was impressive, but then you can do that with the Axe, and I don't know if the Helix FX has IR loading. I didn't see that anywhere. Let's have a... I'm trying to scan for impulse response. I don't think it does, because the HX is designed with tube amp users in mind. So with tube amp users in mind, this is... You would use this in what's called the 4-cable method. Oh, if you're wondering why the HX would have a loader, what I would say if it had an IR loader in is I would plug from my guitar into the HX, where there's things like drive pedals and wahs and stuff that I would put in front of an amp. I would then run to my real amp, and then I would run to the actual input of the amp. Then I would run from the effects loop back to the HX for all the reverbs and delays and shiny things. And then what you could do is you could run that back to the amp to the effects return, which would give you the real tube amp, the real cabinet. But you could also, if it has an impulse response loader, run that separately and run that to front of house, which means there's no microphones to get knocked, because let's be honest, What the front of house hear is not what you hear. They would generally rather have some sort of impulse response sent to them, because then they have complete control over it. There's not going to be any feedback. The microphone can't get knocked because there isn't one. But then the guitarist is happy on stage because they have their tube amp thumping them in the back as they play. So there's a reason why you would do that, if that's your thing. It's not, well, it's not the way that I would do things, because I personally have become a studio tube amp live modeling guy, because convenience live for me trumps the rest, but in the studio the tone is what comes over everything. So I'm both, but separately. Talking of impulse responses, Two Notes, my friends at Two Notes, have an update for their Torpedo series. So if you've been a Torpedo live user, using that with your tube amp, or a Torpedo cab user using that with your effects, there's been a limit up to now. So the limit has been you're only able to use one cabinet at a time with one microphone. So that's quite limiting. I personally really like the sound of two microphones on a cab. Always have. I've always liked that three-dimensional quality that you get from two mics slightly cancelling each other out from millisecond to millisecond. I find it gives me a really rich, thick, big tone. And now they're updating the firmware in those, so that's now an option. So you're going to be able to have two mics. Or if you load impulse responses, you'll be able to have twice the quality, so a 40 millisecond impulse. Did I see the UAD aux? Not a UAD fan. Haven't used it in years. Will not go back to UAD. I refuse to use a captive system that charges you a lot of money for very little processing power that you then have to lug around with you. So let's not go down the UAD route. It might sound great, but for the price you pay for the limitations you hit, nah. Sorry. Anyway, Glyn Emerson just subscribed. Hi, Glyn. So on to Bare-Knuckle's new range. This is really interesting me, and I think I might end up buying some of these. Bare-Knuckle are making what you might call a value range. Just let that sink in for a second. The guys who are famous for their hand-wound single-run pickups that are made every time. These are not mass manufactured, but what Bare-Knuckle have decided to do is they're making 3 levels of pickup in single coil for Strat, single coil for Telly, P90 and Humbucker, and they're calling it the Boot Camp range. So there's the old guard, which is like the traditional, you know, low output 50s and 60s Strat, or like PAF Les Paul. Then there's the True Grit, which has got a bit more output, and then there's the Brute Force, which is really high output. But what they'll probably have is they'll probably have guys in the Bare-Knuckle factory where they've sat them down and gone, this is how we want this pickup to be. And they'll train them properly, I'm sure, because that's Bare-Knuckle for you. But then they'll say, right, make me 100 of this. Make me 100 of that. Avoids option paralysis? Yeah, I can see that. And also, they're not going to be cheap, but they're going to be cheaper. So let's look at a set of the old guard Strats. So yeah, if you've got a Stratocaster that's it's all single coils, you can go, do I want it to be vintage, bit hotter, or super hot? And then you can go, right, that's my brand. UK, where's UK? Great Britain. Andertons. Why is the Andertons website not there? That's weird. Let's just go on Andertons. Andertons.co.uk. Boot Camp. So how much are we looking for a set of Strat pickups? Because the complete custom bare knuckles for a set of 3, you're probably looking about £200. Come on, all I want is single coil. Although I'm thinking if I get some of these true grits and boot camps, it looks like they're doing 7-string versions for the boot camp as well, which is great for the 7-string guys, because there are quite a lot of 7-string players now. There's still less 8 and 9-string players. Overall, it's still relatively niche. Oh, come on. Right, so we're on to P90s. Let's skip ahead a couple. Right, so it's less than £150 for a full Strat set. And the price, as far as I could see, was the same across the board. So the vintage, the mid output, and the high output, all the same price. Which they do the Strat ones in black and white as well. So that's another choice, but that's going to be a relatively simple one, I think, if you know what colour suits your guitar. I'm considering getting a set of these because that's relatively affordable, and I've got a Sun Mustang Stratocaster type thing, which has the original pickups and original wiring and sounds awful. Sounds like ice picks. So what I think I'm going to do, if I can justify this, and maybe I can, is I'm going to replace the electronics in the guitar first, compare that. Then I'm going to replace the pickups afterwards and compare that as well and see how much difference each one makes. But then I'm going to have a classic Strat with hand-wound pickups. Sold a loaded pick guard. Well, ask Bare-Knuckle, they might make them. I know they make things like they make their own capacitors and things like that, so I can't see, and they stock their own, what do you call them, pots. So I can't see a reason why they wouldn't do that for you. But if enough people ask them, I'm sure there's a chance that they will start making that. So that's the Bare-Knuckle news, because that's a good £60–70 off a set. That you would phone them up, you would phone them and go, I'm after this, I'm after that. Can you make this for me in this colour? Yes, thank you. If they're just selling these in box upon box to retailers like Anderton's, that's going to save them quite a bit of money because they're not waiting for the phone to ring. They can be producing those in the downtime. I mean, hey, I might even, thinking about it, the Sun Mustang that I've got, it's HSS. So I might get an old guard for the neck, one of the mid ones for the middle, and maybe a Ragnarok for the bridge. That's going to be more expensive. I think it's over £100. Yeah, Anderton's website looked way better before. Maybe, but it's much more easy to navigate now. So it's not all about the look. So that's user experience for you, UX design. Anyway, moving on. Victory Amps, I wanted to talk about this. Victory Amps are making pedals. And not stomp box pedals. They're making some of their most well-known amps. Let's see if I can get a shot. Like the Kraken. Let's just bring that up. It's not the best quality still there, but they're making things like, they're making the Kraken, they're making the Sheriff, the Countess in these big preamp pedal formats that have 4 tubes in. And Martin Kidd wouldn't say exactly what tubes, but he said they were small pentoed tubes, which means they're not 12AX7s. They are Mullards, and apparently they've got quite a large stock of these Mullard tubes, which, you know, Mullard made very, very reliable tubes. And because they're not your usual 12AX7s, they can probably do a lot more with them. Depending on the price, I might see if I can get a Kraken preamp, because I'm big on preamps. My general opinion in the studio is once you've got a decent EL30 400-watt amp and a decent 100-watt 6L6 amp with decent transformers, there's not that much in it for the power sections, but the preamps can make a huge difference. So if I got something like this Kraken preamp right here and ran that through, say, I've got a Marshall TSL 100 right now, and I do not like the sound of the preamp, but the power amp is a solid big iron transformer 4 3400 watt head. So if I ran this into that, that would probably be incredible. And it's a 2-channel setup, so it's got kind of clean and not clean, as did the Sheriff, which is more of a Marshall-y, vintagey Marshall. So there's also the Countess. I think there was another one, but I didn't see that on display. So I'm really looking forward to them. So from one big pedal to one small pedal. Do you like tube screamers? So you just run it into the effects return. That's right. Yes, so you would run this into the effects return, turn all the controls down on the preamp of your amp that you're using, I think. Although I think you can do what's called the 4-cable method again here, and when you bypass this, it then re-engages the preamp that was in that amp. So, say you had kind of a Marshall-ish tone on the actual amp, and then you turned one of these on, it would cancel out that Marshall preamp and give you the tone of whichever pedal with the real tubes in, which I think is fascinating. So anyway, yes, back to this. If you like tube screamers, JHS pedals have got the one for you. This is the Bonsai, and this really piqued my interest because JHS do some very clever stuff. And this is their attempt at saying, so you like a particular type of tube screamer? Well, try this one, and this one, and this one, on this one, on this one. So there's loads of different tube screamer circuits in the same pedal. And the way this seems to work is it doesn't sound like the other pedals, because it does a TS808, a TS9, a TS10, and quite a few others as well. It does a TS7, it does the Keeley mod and JHS's own mod. It completely changes the wiring structure inside so that it literally is each of the pedals one by one by one. Which is very, very clever. Because it means instead of sounding like a pedal, it goes click. Okay, now this is an 808. Now this is a TS9. Now it's a Boss OD1, which is a symmetrical overdrive. So there's all sorts. There's the TS10 circuit, which is the one that John Mayer likes. So much to go at. So I'm considering getting one of these because I get a lot of guitarists come into the studio and then go, I like a tube screamer, oh, but I only like an 808. And I could go click, listen to this, then click, listen to this one. And if they go, oh, I prefer that, I can go, well, that's a TS10, or that's a TS9, or a JHS modded tube screamer, or whatever it is that they then end up liking. I can then just get them to close their eyes, strike a few chords, and go, which one do you like? Let's move on from this. So, in bass world, Darkglass have released the Alpha Omega Ultra, and they've also released the Darkglass B7K Ultra version 2. And one of the big things here, the Alpha Omega seemed like a cool kind of a distortion pedal, but the Ultra one really interests me because the distortion turns on and off, but the clean is always on. It's got a 6-band EQ. Oh, there's 7 knobs here. One's for the master output volume. You can completely bypass it. It's got a direct, a DI output, and a jack output. It's got cab simulation inbuilt, so you can load an impulse response now into this. So if you prefer sending a sound to front of house that has a cab emulation on, and I personally would, I prefer the sound of something like this going through something like an Ampeg 8x10 tone. Like the old Redwires 8x10s are still some of my favourite impulses. So if I loaded one of these onto here, it's got a micro USB socket, so you can just add that in, which is insane. And that's about all I need to say about that, because this has got 2 types of distortion, which you can blend in. You can blend the level of that distortion. It's got growl and bite buttons, which will change how the distortion reacts. You don't need the distortion on all the time because it's now on a button, but you can have a completely clean preamp going to a cabinet sim to a DI all in one pedal. So unless you run any beardy weirdy effects, that can be your entire rig, and you can just feed the output of this to whatever amp's on stage just to get some volume back so you can hear yourself, and you're done. And the same with the B7K, which has quite a kind of gritty drive, but now has an inbuilt cab sim, so you don't just need to have that full snarl. Let's move on from this. So Chapman guitars, we know them, we love them, have introduced the British Standard series. Now, these are handmade in England by proper luthiers from scratch and are very, very expensive. Very, very, like £3,500 expensive. So, like, PRS money. So you've got to be really, really into Chapman guitars to pay PRS money, because that's Ormsby money, that's Mayonnaise money, there better not be a single flaw in this entire guitar for that kind of money. I mean, Rob Chapman looks very happy in this picture, and so he should if they're as good as they're set to be. I mean, these are some... Apparently they're hand soldered on the bench, and for that money I would expect that much. The binding looks like it's the actual wood, which means it's not taped on. That's an actual maple cap or whatever wood. Yes, so that's maple caps. Nitro finishes. So there's some serious work gone in here. And I am very impressed. If these play the way that they look like they should play, it's things like baked maple necks, so there's no moisture in them, so they won't bow. If these are as good as they're aiming them to be, these guys could, within 10 years, end up on a PRS level if they're that good. Because that's how Paul Reed Smith got his big break, was he made very, very, very good guitars and got people to play them. So, I think it's time for one last thing, and then I'm going to go. And that is, and finally. So, and finally, Jared Dines, internet comedian guitarist, has had his latest guitar announced, which is this. And before anyone says, is this a joke? Yes, this is a joke, but it's real. Yes, the 18 string for 2018, Gent 2018 as it were. So, the original thing was, I think it was Gent 2016 was a video that he did where he had a guitar with one string on it or something like that, just to take the mick. And then in 2017, there was supposed to be a video with a 17-string guitar, but he contacted a guitar builder. There's a whole story where he basically got stiffed. And Ormsby Guitars, who custom make guitars to a very, very, very high standard, have made this for him, which was only revealed at the weekend. Does it, gent? Apparently it does. I mean, there's a bit of a clip here. So it sounds pretty messy, but then the guy's literally had 3 seconds to sit down with it in the middle of NAMM. So, and with an 85 decibel noise limit, which is ridiculous, by the way. I mean, you're not going to get the best out of it, but I mean, it's completely impractical, but this guy is a comedian for the internet. So before anyone goes and gets all offended, this is kind of the point. So yeah, the point is to rile people up, annoy people who've got a stick up the backside. If you can't take a joke as a guitarist, then, you know, that's your problem, not his. I mean, looking closely, there's 3 truss rods at least. You could eat your dinner off that neck. Oh yeah, probably. I mean, they've inlaid a picture of his face. I mean, if anyone ever thought this guy was serious with this guitar, they inlaid a picture of his face. I mean, I think it looks pretty cool. I think, from what I can tell, it's a 6-string bass. Then lots and lots of strings that get really thick. But Lee Anderton was trying to play it. Change your strings after every gig. Yeah, if you get a bank loan after every gig. But it's the kind of thing, does the headstock light up? Good question. I don't know. Oh, wow. Either it lights up or it's just a bright blue Ormsby logo. We'll probably have to wait till Jared Dines' Gent 2018 video to actually see what's going on. So I think that pretty much sums up my NAMM roundup, because a lot of companies announced a couple of new products here, a couple of new products there. A lot of it was like, well, big whoop. And I've tried here to distill it down to what interests me and hopefully some of the guys who watch this channel. So there's Tube Screamers, there's Virtual Effects, there's the almighty Axe FX 3, which, I mean, that's a beautiful piece of engineering. It's still got brushed aluminium on the front. Wouldn't mind betting that Misha Mansour's got one already, but he's not allowed to tell anybody. It's the amp modeler currently to end all amp modelers. I mean, they've even gone so far as to have the input one is mono because that's the jack. They've not tried having a stereo one and then confuse the life out of you and make you have to go like, oh, left is mono or anything stupid. Do you think Kemper's still hiding anything? Currently, no. The professor who's a guy of, he's an academic. He is not really a marketing guy, and he very clearly outright said, right now, the Kemper is the Kemper. So right now, an editor? An editor, so that's not a question. What's the rest of the question? Yeah, so I can't remember the professor's name from Kemper, but he seemed like the kind of guy where if he had something up his sleeve, he would probably say, I've got something up my sleeve. Staying away from modelers as they don't hold their value. What an amps do? Unless you've got an original JCM 800 or something like a Mesa Mark V or something, they don't really hold their value either. And you know, there's so much. Oh, I've got a new follower on Twitch. Tweet. Gear doesn't hold its value. It just doesn't. Oh, Kemper users have been waiting on an editor. Ah, right, okay. Well, that's probably another reason why I've not gone for the Kemper. Like, I've looked, I think somewhere I've got a copy of the Axe FX Reverb plugin. Like, I've seen the editing window and used the editor for an Axe FX Ultra. And that worked absolutely fine. Not having an editor is not an option in this day and age, I don't think. But, oh, Kemper might be working on an FR speaker. Well, that kind of makes sense. Celestion, I know, are working on... oh, that's a point. Where was... news. Oh yeah, Bias 2. So Bias Amp 2, the Celestion impulse response is in. Let's just mute this, because I heard something from Celestion about some of their new speakers, and I wasn't sure if I was allowed to say. Oh, hello.
Hi, this is John from Celestion. Here we are at NAMM 2018. Check out the Neo 250 Copperback. For you guys for whom 150 watts isn't enough power, how about 250? I give you the Copperback. This is not your conventional Celestion guitar speaker. It's not the brown sound. It's not going to go all growly when you dig in hard. It won't break up when you crank it up. This is for the guys who want transparency. They want to hear what the amp has to say. They want to hear the pick definition, the unique dynamics of guitar and amp together. Or if you're somebody who uses a whole heap of foot pedals, you want to hear all of that tone. You don't want to hear the tone of the speaker.
Right. Oh, hello. Right, yes. So the two speakers that they told me about a little while ago and I've had to keep under wraps. So that's this second one. So there's two speakers from Celestion. There's the Copperback, which some people complain that a lot of guitar speakers buckle when you push them. Yeah, 250 watts doesn't mean you need to put 250 watts into it. It just means that the headroom is so high that if you push a 100-watt amp into it, it will not buckle. It will not do the brown soundy thing. If you're looking for brutal transparency, then it's there. So the Celestion F12X200, they described it to me as full range guitar response. So the way that John and Ken from Celestion described it to me was that it does full range, but if you do things like palm muting or really go for a chord, it chugs, it reacts, it thumps, where a lot of full range speakers are just transparent and they just don't react like a guitar speaker should. Hughes and Kettner are releasing a rack-mounted Grandmaster Deluxe 40. I'm sure that's great for Hughes and Kettner fans. Never really liked a lot of their sounds. That's just a personal choice thing. But I will be badgering Celestion to get one of the Copperbacks, because if I can get some really modern tones out of that thing. I mean, the Neo as well, they're not going to be heavy either. So you could have a 1x12 easily keeping up with a 100-watt head, easily, with it absolutely blasted behind you on a stage. I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I'm going to have to try and think about where this fits in the grand scheme of things. I mean, 250-watt handling. If I put two of these in a 2x12, I wonder if I could use it with a bass amp. I wonder if that would be a reliable... I mean, you get all the you goofballs who say, like, oh, you can't use a guitar speaker on bass. And it's like, shut up. It's all about wattage and, you know, speaker excursion handling. If you're not driving it too hard, it's fine. Lemmy used a 4x12 guitar cabinet for years and years and years, and it sounded great. I use a guitar cab and a guitar head on bass in the studio quite a lot to get that growly mid mixed in with a bass amp. Works fine, doesn't blow any speakers up, hasn't shown any signs of damaging anything. I mean, yes, if you were to run one 25-watt greenback on full with a bass amp, it would probably go bang. But if you're relatively careful about wattage and handling and yeah, the Alpha Omega Ultra looks awesome. Yeah, we covered that. That was one of the news topics we did. Yeah, with the impulse response loader inbuilt with a USB 2. So you can get that big amp sound without having to take a big amp. I mean, if you just need some sound on stage, if you want to get a brutal tone from this pedal, maybe you could have a small power amp running a 1x12 with a copperback in it behind you that would just blast enough sound at you that you get that feel without the other musicians on stage crying, or you having to break your back with something like an 8x10 or even a 6x10. And two of these is a 500-watt handling. If I was to pair that up, even with a modelling thing, a modelling amp, if I didn't want to go the full range route, if I wanted to go with the speaker sound route, I could put 2 of these in a 2x12 cab with a matrix amp that runs up to 1,000 watts. Not necessarily run it at full volume, but that's still a lot of solid state volume. I've never on stage run even a bass amp more than probably about 300 watts with a 4x10, and it been, you know, that's been more than enough. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions from the floor before we depart? I'm just going to keep reading all the stuff about the ultra-res speaker cabs and all the different things. There's now 5 knobs for the Axe-FX screen, so it's a bit like the Helix, but with a good sound. They all have push buttons on them as well, apparently. Which is nice, because that means I'm not then twisting them and having to press different buttons. I can just twist and tweak each one. But yeah, you can run completely independent loops, so you can, with the Auto Z technology, so it detects your input impedance, so you can plug, oh, what did you miss from Fractal? The Axe-FX 3. The Axe-FX 3, ladies and gentlemen, the Axe-FX 3. This is an absolute monster. So it's bigger, it's more powerful, a lot more powerful. It's got 4 processors in it. Colour screen. Yeah, so you could have 2 guitarists using the same Axe-FX 3 at once and it wouldn't max out. Yeah, well, the GUI looks less 1990s, that's true, but the reason Fractal went with the black on green was that you could see it from a country mile away in any light condition, which is much more important than pretty colours. So apparently they've really, where did I read it? Yeah, 30 times the resolution, custom designed to provide more brightness and contrast than off-the-shelf displays, optimized for readability in the most difficult conditions, which, if you've ever played on a big stage in the sunlight, is important. If something's not right, maybe you've hit the wrong patch on your pedal, for you to be able to turn around, look at your Axe-FX and see it's on patch 3 when it should be on patch 4, and then go, oh crap, push the button in the space of a second is worth more than pretty colours. So much more. And having the pretty colours and everything in it now as well is great, but before it was for functionality over everything, and I think they did the thing. Can you run the new Line 6 HX into the Kemper? Sure, don't see why not. It's an effects pedal. So you plug in your guitar into this and then run it into the Kemper. So, yeah, why not? Let's have a look at the back. Ooh. The Line 6 HX has MIDI in and out. So if it has MIDI out, then you could program switch the Kemper from the HX. So you could change things on the buttons. So you could change your effects on the HX and change the amp settings on the Kemper at the same time. Can it do 4 cable? It's got sends and returns on it, as well as inputs and outputs, so it looks like it can do 4 cable perfectly well. If the Kemper's got a send and return on the back, then there's absolutely no reason why it couldn't do 4 cable method. Brat Cave says, hey, I like the 1990s. There was nothing wrong with the 90s if you had a roadie to carry all your effects round, if you had like your Eventide and your TC Electronics 2290 and all your Voodoo Labs GCX switcher and yada 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 blah 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 blah. If you had the back strength and the team and the van to do that, great. But I can do all of that now in either this or this. And I mean, to me, it's a testament to the Axe-FX's quality that guys like John Petrucci will use real tube amps live and real cabs and use the Axe-FX for all the delays, reverbs, choruses, all the kind of stuff that you used to use things like TC Electronics for. New Hotone stuff is nice. I I'm trying to get in contact with those guys at the moment because if I remember rightly, is it Hotone UK? I think it's Hotone that are based in Manchester of all places. I think it was these guys. It was one of those Chinese pedal manufacturers. Their office is about 15 miles from my studio. A dual amp pedal. Huh. Oh, that's great website design right there. Let it go to the next thing before the first one's loaded. Acoustic refiner dual mag. Okay, so are they amp modeling? I'll have to check that out. That'll have to be a separate video because I have no idea what's going on there. But yeah, if that's all the questions that everybody's got, I am going to jet. And later in the week, hopefully, probably on Friday, I'll release the serial versus parallel speakers demo. That's 95% done. I just need to get the audio clips from the studio integrated into the whole video edit because I've done the rest of it. And then that'll be good to go, and that'll be up. And if you're supporting us on Patreon, then that will be up early. That'll be up as soon as I can possibly get it uploaded. Hint, hint, support us on Patreon if you possibly could. That would be really appreciated. Or, you know, any way that you can help this, the channel out. We want to do this more full-time, so you know, feel free to help us out. You will get early access to all the videos as well as anything else that we can possibly help you out with. So that is me for now. Thanks for watching. I'm Adam Steele for Hot Pole Studios, and I'll see you in the next video. Good night. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this, feel free to check out our other videos, as you can find here, or check out our Facebook and Twitter, or our Patreon page, which helps us to make more videos like this. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.